Halfway through Love Me Tender, Elvis froze. The band stopped on a dime. From the front row, a thin boy, barely 10, stood clutching a cardboard sign. His lips moved with every word, voice trembling but clear. The oxygen tube under his nose caught the stage light. Before we go on, if you believe small moments can change lives forever, stick with me until the end. This night didn't just make headlines, it left Elvis himself fighting back tears. The floor shook under thousands of stomping feet. At the Mid-South Coliseum, sometime in the mid-1970s, the noise was so loud you could feel it in your chest, and then Elvis Presley walked out. Spotlights swept across the crowd, catching the white of his jumpsuit and the gold glint of his belt buckle. Sequins flashed like camera bulbs as the first chords rang out. The air smelled of buttered popcorn and cigarette smoke, the kind that clung to your coat long after you left. Elvis was in his element, easy smile, mic in hand, working the stage. He nodded at the front rows, winked at someone up in the balcony. 2 songs in, the mood was pure electricity, and then, something caught his eye. Down in the front row, wedged between 2 grown-ups, a boy maybe 10, maybe younger, stood holding a piece of cardboard. The letters were thick, black marker, uneven, but careful. Elvis, you helped me sing again. He was small, too small for the jacket he wore. An oxygen tube ran from his nose, looped behind his ears, and disappeared into a small portable tank at his side. But his eyes, bright, locked on Elvis, were full of life. Witnesses recall Elvis slowing a step, still strumming but watching, his head tilted like he was trying to read the sign twice. A guardian beside the boy, a woman with a faded volunteer badge from a local children's home, bent to say something to him. The boy just nodded, smiling, never taking his gaze off the stage. A photographer crouched in the pit, camera lens swinging toward them. One flash lit the boy's face for a split second, freezing the moment. Elvis kept the song going, but his eyes returned to that spot again and again. Something was working in his mind. He moved across the stage, greeting the other side of the crowd. But when the next song started, his gaze drifted back. The boy mouthed every word, quiet but confident, like he'd been singing these songs his whole life. In the band's corner, the drummer locked eyes with Elvis and raised his brows, as if to ask, "What's up?" Elvis didn't answer, just gave the smallest shake of his head and turned back to the microphone. And then, almost imperceptibly, he lifted his hand toward the band. The electric guitars softened, the bass fell back, and the song eased into a slower, quieter groove. The crowd didn't know it yet, but Elvis Presley was about to break from the night's set list, and from every rule his crew had drilled into him for this tour. The boy in the front row was about to have the kind of moment people would still talk about 50 years later. Halfway through the song, Elvis lifted his left hand. The band froze, and with it, every one of the 18,000 voices in that Coliseum. The sudden silence felt strange. Just seconds before, the room had been shaking with applause and music. Now, all you could hear was the faint hiss of the stage monitors, and the soft shuffle of a restless crowd wondering what was happening. Elvis took 3 slow steps toward the edge of the stage. His boots caught the spotlight, throwing long shadows across the first row. He crouched down, one knee on the stage, and peered into the faces nearest him. "Hey son," his voice rang through the mic, warm but steady. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated. Then into the microphone came a voice that sounded small in size but strong in tone. "Danny." There was a murmur from the crowd. Elvis's eyes softened. He glanced toward the security staff at the base of the stage, and gave a small nod. For a split second, the guards looked uncertain. This wasn't in the show plan, but they stepped aside. The volunteer guardian placed a hand on Danny's shoulder, guiding him forward. Danny's sneakers scraped against the concrete barrier as he climbed over with help from one of the security team. The Coliseum's haze of stage fog and cigarette smoke seemed to hang heavier now. The bright beam from the spotlight picked up dust motes floating between him and Elvis. When he reached the lip of the stage, Elvis knelt lower and extended a hand. Danny took it, small fingers wrapping around the king's bejeweled ring. The crowd collectively leaned forward, holding their breath. Elvis leaned down so only the first few rows might catch it. "You sing, son." Danny nodded once, without any cue. Elvis raised the microphone toward him. For a half-second, the boy's eyes darted over the sea of faces. And then, he began. The first note was soft but sure, each word clear. He wasn't mimicking, he wasn't mumbling. Danny was singing. A line from an Elvis tune in a voice that carried across the hushed arena, rich and steady. Gasps rippled through the front rows. Somewhere in the back, a woman shouted, "Go, honey." The sound echoed strangely in the stillness. Elvis looked over his shoulder toward the band, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. His hand made a rolling gesture, "Keep going." The bass player's eyes widened. The drummer grinned, and then the faintest guitar chord slipped back into the air. Tentative, like testing the water. Danny kept singing, voice blending with the cautious strum. Elvis straightened, moved the mic between them, and something sparked in his expression. The next few minutes were about to turn this concert into a night no one could forget. The band didn't even need a setlist cue. One look from Elvis, and they slid into the opening bars of "Can't Help Falling in Love." Elvis stayed on one knee, microphone between himself and Danny. The first notes from the guitar hung in the air, sweet and slow. Danny's small voice threaded through the chords, steady, matching Elvis word for word. It wasn't perfect, but it was pure. In the nosebleed seats, people craned their necks, trying to see the boy who'd brought the king to a halt. From somewhere deep in the crowd came the pop of camera flashes, one after another, capturing the strange, beautiful pairing on stage. The world's biggest star, and a boy with an oxygen line, singing like he had nothing to lose. Elvis leaned into the harmony, letting Danny carry more than his share of the melody. His hand rested lightly on the boy's shoulder, thumb tapping to the beat. Halfway through the chorus, Danny glanced up at Elvis. Elvis grinned. Not the showman's grin, but something soft. In the cheap seats, a pair of binoculars caught the boy's smile. You could see the way the tubing from his oxygen tank shifted, as he leaned toward the mic, giving the next line his all. The crowd was swaying now as if they were part of it. In the aisles, ushers stood frozen, programs clutched against their chests. As they reached the final lines, Elvis's voice dropped, giving Danny the space to close the verse. The boy's last note hung in the air longer than anyone expected, echoing against the Colosseum walls. When the chord faded, the roar hit. It wasn't polite applause. It was a wave, the kind that rattles the floor and makes your ears ring. Elvis rose slowly, still looking at Danny. With deliberate care, he reached up to his neck and untied the silk scarf, the one he'd worn since walking on stage. White with a blue border, soft from use. It caught the light as he lifted it. Bending down, he draped it over Danny's shoulder. The boy's fingers immediately clutched the fabric, like he didn't want it to slip away. The cameras flashed again. Elvis leaned into the mic and said, "Half to the boy and half to the entire arena. You're stealing my show, son." The laughter from the crowd was warm, not mocking. Danny grinned wider. Elvis turned toward the band, but instead of stepping back into the set list, he gave a small, unexpected signal with his hand. The lead guitarist frowned, then nodded. This wasn't the next song they'd rehearsed. Instead of walking away, Elvis took Danny by the hand and started leading him toward the piano. The crowd's cheers shifted into a hushed anticipation. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't in the program. The set list was forgotten. Elvis Presley, the most famous performer in the world, was about to turn a stadium show into something that felt like a living room sing-along. Still holding Danny's hand, Elvis guided him across the stage toward the black grand piano. The stage lights followed, casting their long shadows across the polished surface. The gold trim on Elvis's belt caught and scattered the light as they walked. The band members exchanged quick glances, unsure of what was about to happen. The crowd, sensing the unscripted turn, grew quieter with each step. By the time they reached the piano, the air was thick with anticipation. "Take a seat right here, son," Elvis said, patting the small stool beside the bench. Danny climbed up, his sneakers swinging just above the stage floor. Elvis leaned toward the band. "Love me tender," he called out, low but clear. The guitarist nodded. The drummer set down his sticks entirely. This one didn't need a beat. The first soft piano notes spilled into the Colosseum. Elvis's voice followed, low and tender. The arena transformed. The roar of the crowd was gone, replaced by the stillness of 18,000 people, leaning into every word. Danny tapped his foot lightly, eyes fixed on Elvis's hands moving across the keys. His oxygen tank sat at his side, a silent reminder of the fragility of the moment. Halfway through the second verse, Elvis tilted the mic toward Danny. The boy's voice, a little breathier now, floated over the piano. The sound wasn't strong, but it carried clear enough that the upper rows could hear. In the audience, heads bowed. Couples held hands. Entire rows seemed frozen, afraid to break the spell. A woman in the third row wiped her eyes with a crumpled tissue. An usher near the back whispered, "Never seen anything like this." Elvis kept the song slow, letting the final chord ring. Then he turned fully toward Danny, leaving his hands resting on the keys. He leaned down, close enough that the crowd could see his lips move, but couldn't catch the words. Danny's expression shifted. First surprise, then a smile so wide it seemed to light up his whole face. The boy nodded once, clutching the scarf still draped over his shoulders. Some say Elvis's eyes glistened as he pulled back. Others remember him giving Danny's hand a quick squeeze before standing. The crowd, still hushed, seemed to be waiting for some. Elvis placed a hand on Danny's back and guided him to stand. The child stepped forward, looking out over a sea of faces he'd never seen before, all of them staring back at him in reverent silence. What Elvis had whispered was about to set in motion the part of this story no one in the audience could have predicted. A promise that would outlive the night. When the final encore faded, the roar of the crowd followed Elvis off stage, but instead of heading to his dressing room alone, he had one more stop to make. The backstage hallway was narrow, lined with black curtains and cables that snaked across the floor. The air smelled faintly of aftershave, and the roses that had arrived from fans earlier that evening. Crew members stood aside as Elvis walked through, Danny at his side, scarf still hanging from his shoulders. "Come on in," Elvis said, holding open the door to his dressing room. The boy stepped inside, his eyes darting to the bright vanity lights and the framed photos on the wall. A couch sat in one corner, piled with fan gifts, flowers, stuffed animals, and neatly wrapped packages. Danny's guardian, the woman from the children's home, stood just behind him, her volunteer badge catching the light. She looked as though she was holding back tears. Elvis crouched down so he was eye level with Danny. "So son, tell me about that sign." Danny smiled shyly. I got sick last year. Couldn't talk much. But I listened to your records in the common room, learned all the words. Singing made me feel better." Elvis nodded slowly, absorbing every word. His elbows rested on his knees, hands clasped together. "You've got a good voice, Danny. Real good. You keep singing, you hear." The boy nodded, clutching the scarf tight. One of the band members poked his head in to say the car was ready, but Elvis waved him off. He wasn't done. He asked about the children's home, what it was like, how long Danny had been there. The boy answered in quick bursts, glancing occasionally at his guardian for reassurance. Elvis listened without interrupting, just nodding now and then. Finally, Elvis reached over to the small table by the couch and picked up a marker. He took the program from the night's show and signed it in bold strokes, adding, "To Danny, keep the music alive, Elvis Presley." He handed it to the boy, who held it like a treasure. Before they left, Elvis placed a hand on Danny's shoulder and leaned in just slightly. His voice was low, meant only for the boy. "You're always welcome in the front row. Always." Danny's eyes widened, and he gave a quick earnest nod. The guardian thanked Elvis, her voice catching. Elvis just smiled and said, "You take care of him. He's got something special." The boy waved once before stepping out into the hallway. Elvis stood at the doorway, watching until they disappeared from sight. 1 week later at the children's home, a large package arrived. No return address, just a single word on the label, Danny. A week after the concert, A plain cardboard box showed up at the children's home. No return address, just a single name written in thick black letters. Danny. The receptionist called him down from the common room. Danny padded into the front office, his scarf from the concert draped proudly over his shoulders. The box sat on the counter, about the size of a small suitcase. He looked at his guardian, who gave the tape peeled away with a slow rip. Inside, nestled in soft tissue paper, was a small guitar perfectly sized for his frame. The wood gleamed under the fluorescent light, the grain smooth and warm. Taped to the inside of the lid was a folded note, written in bold, looping handwriting. Danny opened it carefully. It read, "You'll always have a seat in the front row. Elvis." Beside the note was a faded Backstage pass, laminated and worn, the kind crew members used to clip to their belts. It smelled faintly of leather and cologne. The boy didn't say a word at first. He just ran his hand along the guitar's neck, pressing the strings gently. When he finally strummed, the sound was soft but bright. According to the staff, Danny kept that guitar within arm's reach from that day on. He'd take it to the common room, tuning it with help from one of the older boys, or sit on his bed plucking out simple chords while the other kids listened. In the evenings, he'd play along with the radio, especially when Elvis came on. His fingers would fumble sometimes, but the grin never faded. A local newspaper caught wind of the story. They sent a photographer to the home, snapping a grainy black and white shot of Danny playing the guitar, scarf still around his shoulders, the oxygen tank at his side. The caption read, "Local boy sings with Elvis, receives surprise gift." The photo ran on page 2. It wasn't a national headline, but around Memphis, people noticed. Some sent letters to the children's home. Others dropped off music books and spare strings for the guitar. One former staff member would later say, "That night, and that gift, it changed how Danny saw himself. He stopped being just sick kid. He became the boy who sang with Elvis." Even decades later, those who worked at the home could still recall the sound of that guitar drifting down the halls. The scarf stayed with him too, carefully folded, never washed, the faint smell of the concert still clinging to it. He'd take it out on quiet days, running his fingers over the fabric like it was made of gold. Years later, long after Danny had grown, that same guitar and scarf would make their way back into the children's home, carrying with them the story of the night. Elvis Presley stopped everything for one boy.